what I prefer to concentrate on. We all have our different angles, loads of different angles. What this is, what you've got, the transcription that I've handed out, is from a presentation given by Jenkins and William Law at JFK Lancers November in Dallas 2013, which I recorded at the time. I did record the entire conference, so this is just one of those. So when you look at your handout, you'll find a copy of the autopsy face sheet in there that Jenkins was referring to when he gave his flow of memory, 50-year-old memory of events at Bethesda morgue. And he was referring to that. It was projected on the screen at Dallas, so sometime during. I've also added a photograph taken from David Lifton's Best Evidence, which is taken from his time at Bethesda. I believe he was aged around 20 years old in 1963. Now the transcription you've got, I didn't just knock together in the last week when Ian was unfortunately not able to attend. I did this at the turn of the year and sent it to Richard Bandendale for publication in the Dealey Plaza Echo, which I'm told is imminently to be printed and sent out. But more about the Echo at the end. The Echo article will also include a photograph taken by David Mantic during the 2013 Lancer conference, which shows Jenkins and William Law on the stage at Lancer. And I took that from Mantic's book, JFK's Head Wounds, which we just mentioned before, which Bernard Wiles, another hero, unfortunately invalided and doesn't make it down to Canterbury. Sadly, I've tried to persuade him. He lives near me, and he's been looking after the DPUK website. He sent the Mantic book to me in PDF, but he's put it on the DPUK website. So it's, if you like heavy anatomy, medical stuff, but there's also some interesting things that are included in there. It's a free book. You don't have to pay for it. Referring to the first paragraph that you've got, that's what I sent to Richard. I had a few queries. Jim Jenkins uses the word sound.
I have been reading this. I think I know what it means.
I do now.
Okay.
Well, I say that was done at the beginning of the year. I spoke with Richard about that, and James came back to me and he had an explanation. So I think he's put in something in the Echo about that. But since then, I contacted William Law, and his explanation of sound is: a sound is nothing more than a metal probe that is non-malleable with a rounded end. And that's referring to the use in the back wound. So I think you'll find that interesting. We're going back to the beginning of Barry's talk with Skip Ryberg, and particularly the the Commission Exhibit 385, that makes a fraud out of the Warren Commission.
No kidding.
You'll hear Jenkins going on about that.
Seriously, no kidding.
So yeah. Unfortunately, let me point out that due to a delay at the Adolphus Hotel bar during the conference, at the interval, I did miss the very start of Jenkins's talk. He was in full flow when my recorder was switched on. So, again, I put that in that first paragraph, that Jenkins begins after x-rays had been taken and head and torso sheets had been removed and JFK's body was on the autopsy slab. I'm not aware of any mention from Jenkins of his observations of JFK's arrival in the Bethesda morgue vis-a-vis what casket, and this goes into the shell game that went on at Bethesda. But to note that in David Lifton's book, somebody's just bought that today, in there Jim Jenkins is quoted, he doesn't recall Paul O'Connor's body bag theory, observation, whatever it was. But as regards a casket, he's quoted as saying it was not really an ornamental type thing, it was kind of a plain casket. So that's certainly not the Dallas casket that he's explaining. He goes on, as a matter of fact, it was not something you'd expect a president to be in.
Right.
So there's all sorts, was it 2 or 3 caskets arrived at Bethesda. There's talk of testimony from the late Dennis David of a plain shipping casket delivered in a black Cadillac by men in suits. And followed by the Dallas casket in the grey naval ambulance that was delivered into the morgue by the honour guard. Another bit of interest that's just in the last couple of years, William Law organised 3 guys from Bethesda. The first time they'd come together in over 50 years, it was a year after the 50th anniversary. So in 2014 they met in Chicago, and he also rounded up 3 members of that honour guard, and they all came together and shared their memories. And that is in a book by one of the honour guard guys. Wrote a book about that called Betrayal, which is quite interesting. Okay. Also, William Law and Jim Jenkins are now in the process of completing another book, which is scheduled to be published later this year, according to William Law, At the Cold Shoulder of History. Okay, and William Law contacted me and requested the transcription that you've got for inclusion in that book. Okay, so I think you'll find there's 1 or 2 things in this recording that you'll find interesting and certainly makes the audience at Dallas gasp in one or two occasions. So we'll play that. Just before I do, I'd like a little rant. And it's to do with the DPUK Echo. DPUK is blessed with researchers. There's plenty of them here. Don't need to name them. I'm not a researcher, I just read books. You know, we've got Ian that I'm replacing that's about to publish his book on the Dallas police force. All sorts of people. Matthew Smith has written stuff. If you were in London for the Skype link with Gail Nix Jackson, then you know, you heard appreciation of people like Barry and Bart. He swears a lot, but he's a nice guy. And Chris Scally, who did research on the Nix film. And after me, which I'm looking forward to, Professor Newman's link. And if you haven't got volume 1 and 2 of his present work, you've got to get on Amazon, because there's 5 volumes of his work scheduled, and I think that's the sort of work that I sort of enjoy. And his acknowledgement of the work done, the research by Malcolm, you know, is credit to not just these people but DPUK. And I did submit this article for the Echo, and also something else that I cobbled together. And I think the Echo is a publication done in colour, edited by Richard and printed by James. I think it's a credit to the group. The DPUK website states that this is issued 3 times a year. Well, it isn't. Unfortunately, it's no longer the case. And I'm speaking to Richard, and he thinks that the Echo is threatened with extinction. And I think that'll be a shame. So, my final words before I bugger off, I'd like to appeal to the membership to support the DPUK Echo in any way. You don't have to be, you know, you don't have to go to the National Archives and get stuff. There's all sorts of angles. Enjoyed the photographic stuff of New Orleans from Christopher, what's his name? Last time, you know, things like that. His travelogue around New Orleans, where Oswald was, where various buildings, you know, it fills it up. So the word is, we'll either use it or we'll lose it. So I think the Echo is a credit, as I've said, to the group, so let's keep the flag flying. And eyes down on your handouts, and here's Jim Jenkins.
On the floor, and my impression was I have to clean that up. So, and we did. It was picked up along with the sheets that were removed from the body, or from the torso, and placed in the linen room, which was a small room off of the main morgue. The examination of the head started as a precursor to Dr. Fink arriving. When I asked who Dr. Fink was, I was told he was a specialist in in warfield wounds. At that point in time, we proceeded with the autopsy. Dr. Humes was at the head, along with Dr. Fink. Dr. Humes was on the left side of the body. Dr. Fink was on the right side. I was at Dr. Fink's right shoulder and equal to the shoulder of the president's body. Dr. Boswell was on the other side, opposite of me. And when they began to examine the body, Dr. Fink and Dr. Humes, which were right here with me, and as I was observing them, there was a small entry, exit, anyway, a small wound that appeared to be approximately right in front of the top of the right ear and slightly above it. There was a discussion between Dr. Fink and Dr. Humes as to a gray area that actually surrounded the wound. And there was speculation by Dr. Fink that maybe that was lead from a bullet. After that was there, it was not really probed, or much of a discussion continued after that, because at that point in time, there was a discussion with Dr. Humes and Admiral Berkeley. And that exchange was pretty much the norm for the rest of the night. Dr. Humes would go to Dr. Berkeley because Dr. Berkeley would call him over and they would discuss, and he would come back. He and Dr. Fink would look at other aspects of the head wounds. And about the same time, Dr. Bosley and I started the autopsy on the torso. We made the usual autopsy cuts. Ours was a little different. We went from one shoulder to the other shoulder in a single U-shaped incision. Then we moved this flap that was caused back up over the face to the rib cage, and then we removed the organs intact. We did that by tying off the major arteries, severing the trach and the esophagus, and lifting it all out. We placed it on a cutting board. The cutting board was placed over the chest area, or slightly down toward the midsection. This cutting board was pretty much a cork type board with a scale that was mounted on the corner of it. And as Dr. Boswell dissected out the organs as whole organs, then he weighed them and he gave me the weights. The weights are what you see at the top, and that's where where the results were added. Again, too, that's significant because that is not my handwriting. My handwriting doesn't look that nice, believe me. But at that time, we finished the organs. The heart was. We did at Bethesda. We did autopsy is a little different. We didn't sausage the heart like normal protocols in other places where I've done autopsies. We actually went into the ventricles and we opened them where we could see the walls and so forth and not have to see them in sections. The heart was examined in that manner. The intestinal tract, both large and small intestines, were taken out and taken to a deep sink. Now, normally in other autopsies, that was my job. We would open up the intestinal tract, lay it open, clean it with the water, and then we would examine it for lesions and things of that nature. Now, with the residents, we cleaned the intestines, Paul and I, according to which one of us got the task when we were there. And the resident would come and look, once it was clean, would check for lesions, tumors, diverticular, things of that nature. So that was done by Dr. Boswell. He did that personally. Then there were some controversies about whether to take the testicles or not, and they were taken. I'm not sure why the controversy was and so forth, but the kidneys were also examined and the adrenals were examined. Due to the fact is that I've heard, I'm not sure, because I didn't see any of the final results from these organs, just the gross at the autopsy. But I think they were asked because there was a possibility that there was Addison's disease involved. Moving on, during the time that we were dissecting and weighing the organs, Dr. Humes was probing the back wound. Now, on this face sheet, that was approximately where the wound was placed. And that's where I remember the wound being, into the back. But the significance of this is that I watched the impression of Dr. Humes probing that wound with his finger. He probed it to the depths of that wound with his finger. I could see the impression on the pleural, on the back of the pleural cavity, or the chest cavity, but it never entered the chest cavity. He and Dr. Fink took a sound. The sound is, for many of you, you probably know what a sound is. But I suggest they probably used the sound because the sound is rounded. Because one of the things that they expressed was the fact is that we don't want to create an entry into the pleural cavity if there's none there. Now, moving on back to the lungs. This is related to the lungs. On the right top of the middle lobe, and almost it's a junction. The lung has 3 lobes. There was a bluish type of indentation about probably the size of your thumb, and speculation was that was caused by the bullet that entered at the point in the back. I know that this is one of the major controversial points related to the neck wound. Then let's quickly go to the neck wound, and we can discuss that. At the point that the back wound is, it is probably, just roughly guessing, 10, maybe a little more, a little less, centimeters below the wound in the throat. And at no time in the autopsy did we do any examination of the quote trach that we were told that's what it was, that it was a trach. Now, there were questions about it because of how large it was. It was, I think on the face sheet it says it was 6.5 centimeters. That's a little over 2 inches. The other thing was that this trach was done in its horizontal in relation to the neck. Most trachs are much smaller, and in those days they were done in a vertical. Okay. The description of the wound here, as you see it, was vastly different from what was we ultimately got from Parkland, as were a lot of other information that we got later.
Have you ever seen a trach like that big?
No, I've never seen a trach that way, and I've never seen one that large, because the old metal tracheotomy tubes were, my guess would be probably 5 millimeters, 3 to 8 millimeters, something like that. But again, too, is that we never really questioned it. The only thing that we did was when the flap was up, and the flap was up over the face, then Dr. Boswell kind of lifted the flap and looked up in there and stuck his fingers in there. No comment, no nothing at that point in time. But that wound was never probed. It was never examined for entry or exit, which brings another controversial point. We did multiple x-rays before we actually proceeded with the autopsy itself.
Jim, when you say multiple, take a guess and tell us how many times you set the body up with the body around. How many x-rays would you estimate you took?
I think Custer and I took, of course, the original AP and laterals. We took multiple, I would say, it's really hard to say how many x-rays we did, but I would say that probably for every one that we took, we did 5 repeats at the request of, the pathologist, or more or less my impression at the request of the gallery. And nothing seemed to be pleasing the people in the gallery. Actually, nothing was being done in the autopsy seemed to be pleasing the people in the gallery. We were directed again, at one time we were directed away from the wound in the neck, because the reasoning we were given was that it would have been if we had actually examined it, we would have had to open it into the trach, and it would have been too hard for the mortician to conceal it. But
To find the path of the bullet, would you ordinarily do that?
yes, you would have to. It would be, you would actually do the incisions and follow the path in there. At least you would have probed it to see where it went. And then the other thing with the x-rays were we were finding no bullet fragments. We found no bullet fragments that were in the body itself. Now, the bullet fragments that people relate to were bullet fragments and bone fragments that were brought in after the autopsy was underway and given to us in a small tie top bag. It's similar to a Ziploc, except it has a tie. It runs across the top and the ends fold over and that type of thing. That was placed on the autopsy table at the right ear of
Can you estimate the time that you remember that?
No. Now, that's always been a question that I've had about time. It was a military morgue, so it had a huge clock. But the clock was at the other end of the morgue over the huge autoclave. And my attention was such that I had to be aware of the needs of the pathologist. That was my purpose for being there. So my attention was focused on that table and on whatever they asked me to help with. At the conclusion of the autopsy, my personal ideas from the things that I said, well, I was sure that the entrance wound was above the right ear and that the large wound in the back was an exit wound. In the back, in the wound in the back, there were some questions by Dr. Boswell to the gallery. He made a statement, or he asked a question, really. Were there any surgery done on the head at Parkland? What he was referring to is that there seemed to be an incision at one of the points on the large incision that radiated out toward the middle suture. And at that point in time, I just looked at it as maybe something he was curious about and so forth. But then I realized that later on, when the brain was removed, that incision made it possible for the wound to be spread to where we did not have to do a skull cap. And we did no skull cap. And I heard a comment. Oh, skull cap, I'm sorry. Normally the way we took the brain out of the cranium was we made an incision from this ear to this ear across. We spread the scalp back and forward. And we took a striker saw, we made a notch in the front of the skull to orientate us when we replaced it. And we took the whole skull cap off. And then we removed the brain. At that time, we always attempted to remove the brain intact with a spinal cord. Sometimes it worked, very rarely did it work. Most of the time, the spinal cord was torn off, and we had to go in from the interior of the body at autopsy, and we would remove parts of the spinal cord and then of the spinal column and take that out. We did not have to do that with the president's body. Actually, I don't really remember that we ever removed the cord itself, just the brain.
Now, Jim, let's stop here for a minute, because this is where the big controversy comes in. Paul O'Connor is well known, famous for saying that when he saw the brain, that there was no brain within the brain, that it had been blown out. And yet, when we met in New Orleans 15 years ago, you told me, and you have to understand that Jim didn't know me from Adam. So when I finally worked up the courage to be able to come and see him and he agreed, I didn't know whether he was going to give me 10 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever. You know, you have to understand that unlike Paul O'Connor, who was a wonderful, gregarious person with a great sense of humor and would tell you anything you want to know, Jim doesn't do this stuff. So that's why we're lucky to have him tonight, because he just doesn't involve himself. He's never sought the limelight in this thing. Anybody that ever wanted to talk to him, they've always had to hunt him down and find him, and if they were lucky enough to get him to talk to him. So I was very lucky to be in a room, sitting with him, asking these questions. And I could tell from the look on his face, it was reluctant. He was reluctant to do it, but he did it. And at one point, I'm sitting there, and you said, one of the doctors made an exclamatory statement. And he was looking right at me when he said it, and he said, I think what he said, okay, was, meaning the brain, the damn thing fell out in my hand. And I said, it fell out in your hand. What does that mean to you? Tell him what you said to him.
Okay. That statement was made by Dr. Humes. Dr. Humes. Humes. Okay. Again, to remember that Humes and King were actually the people who were working with the head and the head wounds, so forth. That was a statement, and as I said before, it was a statement that kind of surprised me. But as he took the brain out, he handed it to Dr. Boswell, who was actually across the table from me. Since I had been assisting with Dr. Boswell and I was the only corpsman at that point in time that was working with Dr. Boswell, I followed Dr. Boswell to the bucket of formalin where we infused the brain. Now, I told William, I gave him some of the impressions that I had of the brain when I first saw it. My first impression was the damage to the brain does not correlate with the extensive damage of the skull. And what I mean with that was the right anterior portion of the brain was damaged, and there was some tissue missing. But the brain, due to the trauma apparently, was in that area kind of gelatinous. And that pretty much stands to reason, because, you know, when you traumatize the brain, it's not like traumatizing a muscle or something like that where you get bruising and so forth. The brain actually has a large amount of fluid in or water, so it kind of becomes mushy and gelatinous, and that was what I saw. The other thing, I didn't think the brain was large enough. I thought, I had an impression that it was smaller than what it should be coming out of the cavity that it came out of. Now, these were just impressions on my part. That was a first sight, first impression type thing, and I keep apologizing for this, Mike. Then we carried, or Dr. Boswell carried the brain to our bucket where we infuse the brain. Now, how we did it is important, because our normal method was we had a stainless steel bucket. We filled the bucket approximately half full of buffered formalin. Oh, okay, well, they're telling me that. All right.
They're going to give us 5 more minutes.
Okay, they're going to give us 5 minutes. I'll try to wrap it. When the bucket had approximately was half full of formalin. We had created a gauze sling that went over the top of the bucket. We laid the brain upside down in that sling. We had 2 needle apparatus that came from a carboy of formalin that was up on the top of the cabinets. And what we did with it was we took those needles, we infused the brain through the 2 internal carotids at the circle there at the base of the brain. Now, those carotids were retracted, and it was extremely difficult. As a matter of fact, we had one of the residents come in, which was the chief resident, because Dr. Boswell and Dr. Humes, they didn't do this menial type thing of placing the infusion needles in and so forth. So what we did was we infused the brain, and it was extremely difficult because of the carotids and the condition of the carotids.
So what does that mean to you, Jim?
Well, in my experience, when vessels are severed, and I mean for a period of time, they retract, especially arteries, because of the way they're constructed. And over a period of time, it's almost like they begin to close it off themselves. So the other thing that I noticed was the brain stem. Where the brain stem was cut to remove it from the cranium, the brain stem looked like it had been cut from 2 different sides, from each side and met in the middle. I can relate to that because if you've ever tried to cut something from the right side, then go back and cut it from the left side, it never, almost invariably never is the same level. And this is what the brainstem looked like. Some of the, I've been asked many times about this. And did I think if the brain had been removed prior to the autopsy? Taking into consideration the abnormal things that I just described, I feel like it was.
Can you understand what I felt when I was sitting across the table from him? And I'd not heard that before.
Well, it took 50 years.
I had the same reaction.
But, again, too,
He needs more water. Need some vodka. I don't know.
at that point in time, I was a hospital corpsman. I was going through the Navy's clinical laboratory blood banking school. I had a great interest in medicine. I later rectified all of these ideas that the things that I saw and verified in my own mind by the anatomy and so forth that I had taken in graduate work that I did. The work that I did in the graduate program was 2 years, in medical school a year to finish the graduate work, and then a return for 2 years to finish the MD degree. Along the line, I became disenchanted, so I accepted the graduate degree. It was more to what I think I can contribute is the scientific end of it, as opposed to the practicing end of it. So, anyway, these things that occurred, that I maintain those in my memory exactly as I described them. I have, over the years, deliberately not pursued an investigative entity into the assassination. I've pretty much avoided reading about the assassination other than in the chapters that people like authors like William and the other two authors that I work with asked me to read, and some chapters that recently that another author has asked me to read. Yesterday I attended 2 sessions. One was on the x-rays. I had seen that presentation before in a session in Florida where Paul and I and several other people went with Deborah and William and had a discussion session, which was very enlightening. If we had more time, I'd like to open it up to questions. Okay. I think leave your hand went up first. I am not a doctor. My education is I have a master's in clinical pathology and in clinical immunology.
From what you observed that night, do you think that there is any way that that would have been entrance was exited as correct?
None whatsoever.
Repeat the question.
Yes, my question was, from what he observed that night, was there any way that the president loaded back and exited at the throat?
Yes, I think that the question was, is this correct? I think the top is a wound. The one below that is, it could be a blood spot or something of that nature. The wound, okay. The way I identified the position of the wound was by taking a position of the clavicle. The scapula, which is, we call it the backbone. It was between the spinal column and the scapula on the right side, almost at the top of the scapula. Now, I know there are some measurements that were given and so forth to orientate him. Those measurements are approximately would be approximately correct. They are talking about 14 centimeters or something of that nature. Yes, sir.
Jim,
That's a good question.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt and say that we have to get ready. There's a couple of other speakers. We have been offered time.
Okay, listen, really, I know that you have questions that are important. I don't discount that, but we have two other speakers, and the problem is we have a banquet tonight, and we have to be out of this room at 6 o'clock to set up for the banquet. And we have, I don't know how many tables in here that have to be set, and we only have an hour for them to do that. So what I would like to suggest, if you would you be willing to come back after the banquet at 9:30?
Sure.
Okay. Okay, you can answer the one question.
Okay, I'd like to answer the one question about the brain. When the brain was removed, it was handed directly to Dr. Boswell. It was taken directly to the infusion area, and the infusion began. In other words, we placed the needles, left it in there. As we were leaving the next morning, the brain was taken out of the sling, put into the bucket with the top on it, and placed in what we call the brain room for dissection at the next session that they have. Okay, thank you.